Back in July arguing for the government to stay out of social media. I thought it was a really good, thoughtful piece, and I am going to bring her on to chat with me. Amelia, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I read your piece in USA Today arguing against government intervention in social media companies. But for everyone who hasn't read that piece, can you kind of summarize your position?
Sure, it's been in the news, it seems like at least once a month since probably Trump got elected. And we saw this with the Diamond and Silk hearing that Congress did a couple months ago. And most recently, Congress had another hearing with some representatives from Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. And I found the whole thing very alarming. There are Republican Congress people and Democratic Congress people talking about how, Facebook or Twitter has a monopoly or we should regulate them like they're a public utility. And I think that that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. I think people forget that when we give the government that much power over our lives, especially when we give them power over our speech, we're opening the door to some of the worst sorts of tyranny. And I find that really frightening.
So a lot of people say that these social media companies, these big tech companies have a monopoly on the industry, and via antitrust laws, they need to be broken up. Do you buy into that argument?
I don't. So in the 90s, there was an antitrust case against Microsoft. At the time, Internet Explorer was used by anywhere from 80 to 90% of all desktop computers. And the antitrust case actually failed. They didn't take any action against Internet Explorer or Microsoft. But we saw the introduction of Google Chrome, and that just completely blew Internet Explorer out of the water. So I think when people say, oh, well, obviously Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, they all have a monopoly, Google has a monopoly. I think, yeah, sure, they control a lot of market power right now, but we forget that in the tech space especially, these things are never permanent. You can always get knocked off by some random college kid coming up with great ideas in their dorm room or in their parents' garage. And I think that we really need to remember that innovation is something that we should encourage, not discourage, and that we should always count on those things.
I am really surprised by the number of conservatives who don't agree with this position of the government not intervening in social media companies. Why do you think it is that so many conservatives are leaning in the direction of government intervention?
I think we have this tendency to really seize power when we have it. We say, oh, we have the White House, we have the Congress. We should just take this opportunity right now and push through whatever legislation we want and hit back, own the libs forever. But you always forget government power always changes hands eventually. Trump's not going to be president forever. We're not going to have a Republican Congress forever. And we see that people lose sight of the fact that we do change power often. Even Democrats were falling short on this when talking about President Obama's sort of expansion of the presidential power. And then Trump can come in and reverse all of his decisions just because he took these actions alone. And now Trump has all this additional power. So I think Democrats and Republicans should really be coming on together on limiting government intervention. And because that will benefit all of us in the long run, where we all have a bigger opportunity to share our ideas, where we all have sort of equal opportunity to interact in the marketplace.
So the left and the right have two competing goals when it comes to those who believe in government intervention. The left says that they want people to not be able to say racist things on social media. The right say we want government to intervene so no one is discriminated against. If those two goals are competing, then who's to say who is going to win if the government does intervene?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's true. And I think especially if we're talking about having some sort of regulatory agency that would one day regulate social media, if conservatives are saying, oh, we don't want these companies to be able to discriminate against different voices, and Democrats are saying we don't want people to be able to share fake news or make these audacious conspiracy theories. But we forget that, especially if you turn this into some sort of bureaucracy, you completely lose control over it. Even elected representatives lose control over these things to where it's so distant from all the people that we have no control over it anymore. And I think that people should run away from these things, not run towards them.
So talk about the real life consequences if the government does decide to intervene in social media.
So I think one of the solutions that people have been talking about is regulating social media companies like they're a public utility. So, they can't interfere with anything that's posted, which I think if they're going to do any sort of regulation, this is probably the least harmful one. But the biggest problem with it is that it pretty much it sort of builds a moat around these companies so that their competitors can't always get into the marketplace with them if there's so much limitation on what you can do to innovate and be different from your competitors. Then we're just sort of shutting down this market, and that's sort of a really silly thing to do. We don't know what the future of social media will look like, so I think making it a public utility would be completely ignoring the future. And with antitrust, I really fear this revival of so-called hipster antitrust policy where we need to break up all these big corporations, especially in the tech world, just because they're big. A lot of people use them. Well, a lot of people use them because they're good and we like them and they add value to our lives. So I don't think that we should punish companies for that. I think that whole attitude is just going to lead us to disaster where big companies are broken up just because they're big, where we're hurting companies that have done good things.
So there seems to just be kind of a lack of optimism when it comes to breaking up these companies. Like competition is not going to be enough. We thought that about MySpace, though, when MySpace was the only one in the industry. But then Mark Zuckerberg came along and introduced Facebook. So I don't really understand the conservatives who don't think that the free market can come through for us.
Yeah, I don't fully understand that either. I mean, part of it is how smart are these alt-right type companies. I'm not trying to like insult them, but I don't know if they're fully thinking through like their actions. If anyone's going to be targeted by the government, it's probably them. I don't know why they would think that that would somehow help them if the government decided to regulate Facebook. Normally, when the government begins to regulate an industry, that pushes out all the small competitors because they can't afford the lawyers and all the red tape. That's just too difficult for small companies or entrants into any new market.
So what do you think the solution is to the censorship that's happening of conservatives?
I think that what we've been doing is probably the best option where we band together and we talk on these platforms, we call out the companies that are doing wrong things and we say, hey, you can't do this. This is so silly. You can't take down these videos just because you don't like them or just because a bunch of liberals are flagging them as hate speech or offensive. And we also need to think long term and ask them to start looking at their community policies and maybe rethinking some of the offensive language, stipulations, or that sort of thing, because that is so incredibly subjective that I don't really see any way for that to be good in the long run. But yeah. And I think a lot of people are so skeptical that we could do this, but I think if things get bad enough, we should think about having our own platform or someone opening up a platform that's just open to everyone and has like very limited censorship only in cases where it like violates the law. I know that people are skeptical that that could happen, but I think again, in the tech space, anything can happen. We shouldn't discount that and we shouldn't like close off that opportunity just because it seems unlikely.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me. I learned a lot from our conversation. Can you tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Amelia Irvine, my name, and then the number 3.
And you are also a contributor to Young Voices. Can you tell everyone what the website is for Young Voices?
Yes, it's www.young-voices.com.
So everyone go check that out. Thank you so much, Amelia, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
So